Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and the Nalita E. Walker Fund for KNME-TV, the KNME-TV Endowment Fund, and viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, why some students need extra support as they begin studies in the STEM fields.
I didn't have that knowledge just innately that you take this test at this time. You have to find people that know what they're doing and help you along the way and keep you motivated.
And Senators Martin Heinrich and Tom Udall join us to talk about proposed reforms for the mining industry. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Welcome to New Mexico in Focus. Later this hour, the Line Opinion panelists discuss the sharing economy. You've probably heard of Uber, Airbnb, and Lyft. Here's the question: are unlicensed vacation rentals hurting the economies of New Mexico? We'll talk about that. And our state received an extension for one deadline in the implementation of the Federal Real ID Act. Now what's next? We'll get to that later in the show, but first, let's talk about the upcoming legislative session with this week's Line Opinion panelists.